In today's episode, we will be talking about the month of the military child, highlighting moving and the perspective of some experts, our very own children.
Hi, and welcome back to the Virtual Compound. I'm Amelia.
I'm Lacey.
I'm Katie.
Time and date check-in. It is 6:18 p.m. on what day is it? Tuesday.
It is 9:18 p.m., also on a Tuesday, I hope, because Lacey said it was Tuesday.
And it is 11:18 in the morning, so a.m. on Wednesday here in Japan.
Do you have any,
Nice.
Did you ever figure out how to tell us the lottery numbers? You
I
told
have
us
not,
earlier.
and if I did, I'm not sure I'd share.
Oh, well, fine. It would help to go a long way for the compound. I mean, getting it going if you did share. But
True.
just don't share it here, text
Yeah.
it to us instead.
Yeah. Or just, help us buy all the things that we have to do for a podcast, which is actually a lot.
Yeah,
Yes.
there is quite a bit. Yeah.
Didn't
But
expect
it's fun.
that.
I mean, it's
Mhm.
been fun to learn how to use it all, though.
Yeah.
Had a lot of fun with that. But yeah, there was a lot more steps.
Yeah.
A lot more steps.
A lot more steps and a lot more just everything. I'm actually quite surprised.
Mm-hmm. But it's fun. I love it so far.
New skill.
New skill.
New skill to put on the resume.
Yeah. Got to build that resume.
Well, as you may have heard in our last episode, April is the month of the military child, and we are all blessed with our very own children to honor. And as I like to call them, my greatest arts and crafts projects.
Amelia.
I'm doing long division.
Oh, that's fun.
So fun. Each episode will have special guests, our own military brats, answering questions about their experiences and take on this military life.
We will also hear from our fellow arts and crafters and get their take on raising good humans in a life that isn't as consistent as we might like. As we continue in future episodes, we'll hear more from them, but we're going to talk about our experiences with moving and get some insight from our kids and those fellow arts and crafters, aka our husbands.
Only because Lacey, who says Jeremy and I are expert arts and crafters, and look at what we made, forgot you were talking about our husband. It's fine.
But it just makes it more entertaining. It's fine.
Okay.
I just spilled my water everywhere, and it's not sparkling water.
Okay, I about had a heart attack for you. Maybe we can get sponsored by LaCroix.
I know. Or Polar. I'll take any of them. Any of them.
True story.
Oh, good lead in, Amelia, with the homeschooling and long division. Lacey, what do you have to tell us?
With April being the month of the military child, we wanted to focus on military spouse-owned businesses that cater to children, and today we wanted to tell you about Jessica Stremmer, fellow military spouse and author of science-focused books for kids. Jessica's books encourage kids to think critically about the world around them, perfect for kids of all ages. As I've mentioned, I homeschool my kids, and I'm looking forward to using these books as companions to my kids' science curriculum. The best thing about Jessica's books, aside from the gorgeous illustrations, are the animal-focused plots, which I've noticed is engaging for all learning styles and ages. Her book Fire Escape details the impact of fires on wildlife. Great Barrier Reef takes readers on a journey to see the incredible aircraft carrier USS Orensky become a new home for marine life. And her latest book, Lights Out, explains the significant issue of light pollution and the impact it has on migrating patterns, which can be found at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. All of her books can be found through her website, jessicastremmer.com, at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and bookshop.org.
So, speaking of our arts and crafts projects, let's talk about their experiences moving. Obviously, they have their own insight and their vast range in age. I mean, the youngest of all of our children is my youngest. She'll be 2 this summer. And then my oldest is the oldest of all of our children, who is 18. So I have a pretty big gap, but you guys are kind of more in that like middle youth between, 7 and, well, no, I guess it's always almost 13. So we've got this broad range of age. So we've had all of these different experiences of moving with our kids. And we already know that as mothers, things are different across the board, family to family, even base to base, but most drastically different is our experiences raising our children in the military versus our peers and family members in the civilian world. So, like, Amelia, what's something that you feel like is completely different that you've dealt with raising kids in the military life than your civilian peers?
I think the amount of like transientness, like they make a friend and that friend is gone next
Yeah.
year or in 6 months. And especially like in Sam's hometown, his friends he was friends with since kindergarten, and his friends that have moved back there, they'll have the same friends from kindergarten. I think that's really different. And then I also think, and this kind of applies to military families depending on like where you're stationed and what state, but for me personally, it has almost never applied. Being like close to family.
Yeah.
Because a lot of my friends are like, oh yeah, my mom's gonna come and watch the kids so I can go on a date with my husband. That will almost never happen. Like, yeah, our parents would come out and
Yeah.
visit, but or my sister or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. But we were fortunate enough to be close to family, and the fact that we were on the other side of the state, which is Texas, so it's not a small state. It's not like we were on the other
Right.
side of Rhode Island. We were on
Right.
we were still a 2-hour plane ride away. And yeah, I would say the transient nature of the people in our lives, and then also the like how far we are from family is
Yeah.
much different.
That's
Yeah.
definitely
When I
been a
was
tough one.
Yeah. When I was writing this question, I was actually thinking back to when I was 19 and my sister was having my first niece, and her, labor and delivery plan, like birth plans were a thing back then. And her experience was completely different than my experience just a few short years later. Guess who that is?
A goose.
My experience a few short years later was completely different than my sister's because we were in the military, hospital and care system. And that was completely different until our last one. Like it took almost 18 years for the military to catch up to the civilian world as far as being a little bit more homeopathic and birth plan and all of those things.
The transient is a big part of it, but also the family side because, when we moved to Okinawa, the first cousin on one side of our family was born, and that changed the dynamic entirely. And while they're close coming back, the actual family dynamic is not the same. And that's fine. We chose this life. We did. I mean, our children did not choose this life, and that's where it's really tough as the mom because we can handle, we can adapt, we can choose to handle, we can choose to adapt. They don't have that choice. It was taken away from them simply because we chose to have children and we chose this life before they came along. And that is a really tough one because we are out of sight, out of mind, and that can be really hard on rebuilding those relationships after coming back. Relationships have not been rebuilt as well as they were before, and it's hard to do that from a long distance. But in addition to that, it's also not having the physical support basically guaranteed because our spouses are not guaranteed to be around. And while a lot of civilian families, they still travel and they do things, and some of them are honestly gone more than our husbands are. But I also see how taken for granted it is, and how some people just choose to not like get off work to help us, get one kid to dance and the other kid to swim. And it's like we don't have that option. And while we aren't, a single parent on paper, in action sometimes it comes across that way, and that can be really difficult on my girls, just because they get pulled back and forth. Lexi spends just as much time down in Annapolis while Zoe's there for dance as Zoe does, but she doesn't have any friends down there, and she has to play by herself at the library for 2 hours every day. And that's tough. This has been one of the harder. They were both really excited to come back here because it's our house, but it's also been really difficult because there are no built-in friends, and we don't even have, we are more limited on the ways to find those friends. And that's where I feel like I'm not a failure for it, but when you can't provide something for your kids, it's hard.
Yeah,
It's hard
I
to
get that.
do
I
that.
mean, especially like you guys came back and you were in a duty station for 1 year.
Yeah.
So that's really hard to know that you're going to be there 1 year, and like your kids need friends. You guys need people, but at the same time, like that's even when it's a 3 year duty station. Like after you and I left, Amelia was like, "Forget it, I'm not making friends." I'm sure she did because she's Amelia and
Right.
she's actually very loving.
She is. She is. You are. Don't give us that look. You know you are. You know we're right. Yeah, well, and with us
Did you
being there
not see the thing I sent on Instagram? Don't lie to CNN. Don't do that.
we're not. Okay, well, once
She's got a
you
smart mouth, and she hated most people equally.
Oh, but see the point is you said most. That means that there
Yeah.
are still a few out there that can nudge through that crack in the
Circling
armor.
into year 6, I think I'm just gonna like not have friends.
I mean, I understand that too. That's why we did that's why we're doing the podcast, so that we don't have to worry about that.
Exactly.
But
Yep.
yeah, the girls had a tougher time in New Jersey, Zoe specifically, because she knew she was only going to be there for a year. And she did
Yeah.
make friends. But at 11, 12, there's not the same type of connectivity that we have. And so when we moved, she was sad, but not heartbroken like she was when she left Okinawa, or even when she made the move
Yeah.
to Okinawa. But it has taken her 7, 8 months to actually open up and try to have friends outside of school, or like carry that friendship outside of school, or try to carry that friendship outside of dance even. Like they're there,
Yeah.
and she even admitted it to me. She's like, I know that I am not opening up and I am getting better. She finally had her first sleepover that wasn't with her best friend who also came over from Okinawa, and they live in Northern Virginia, but we don't get to see them all that often. But she finally had her first like approved sleepover last week after all of
Yeah.
this time.
Well,
so
that's Abby too. I mean,
yeah.
Abby actually, she talked about that I guess it was the first set of questions that we asked her, about how she doesn't necessarily like open up and make friends very easily and put herself out there, but for a different reason. I think it's a personality thing. But coming back for Emma's senior year, that was kind of like the biggest thing was, I'm only going to be here for a year. Like, why try? And that didn't last very long, thankfully. Like she got excited and she kind of did, all the things and was, eager. But I think that as moms, that's the hardest thing to see them go through. But in the end, ultimately, I think it really does make them more well-rounded people.
No, I agree. It does. And I think that they are both thankful for it because they do thankfully get along together very well, and they lean into each other even when they fight. There's a not quite 5-year difference between the two of them. But when it comes down to them versus the PCS world, they are their do or dies when their besties aren't with them. Now, you throw Aubrey and Clara into the mix, and that sister is, I don't know how that's gonna go. But when it's the two of them, they'll take on the world together.
I think Emma, or maybe it was Brody. No, I didn't ask Emma. It was Brody and Abby. They both touched on it, but Abby really hit it. She was talking about how even though it was really hard leaving here, we'd been here for 5 years, it was almost everything she remembered going back to Okinawa, because she went to a public school, and the only time she's ever been to public school in Okinawa. It was actually a lot easier than coming back here because all of the kids that she was surrounded with were in the military population. Now, some of them are obviously like civilian kids and things like that, but because we have our own culture, the military culture is its own, and the kids within that have their own culture. I think that was probably like the best duty station for that age group at that time, because like that culture is something that they can all recognize. I mean, standing the national anthem before a movie plays, like you talked about, with Zoe recognizing that, or when you're on base and Colors plays, That's
Mhm.
my favorite part
Yeah.
of being on base.
Yeah.
And Colors is the national anthem, and
We
Reveille and the Japanese
tap.
national anthem in Japan.
Yeah.
Like when you're on base, like the world stops. The kids know to freeze and turn towards the music or wherever there's a flag, and like seeing all the cars pull over and nobody going at stoplights with their hazards on. That's probably one of my favorite aspects of life on base.
Yeah.
Just because you see these really tiny kids just stop and turn.
Well, it was interesting because Zoe came in the other day, or we got in the car, and she's like, "Mom, we live just close enough to base. We live about a half mile from one of the side gates, and we live just
Mhm.
close enough to base that when you're outside, you can hear colors and you can hear taps and all that stuff." And she was taking out the trash, and she was like, "And it went off, and I had to like stand still, and there were no flags around, but I guess our neighbors had." Like a wreath with the flag, so she like turned and like aimed herself towards that. I was like, that's amazing. You haven't had to do that in over a year,
Yeah.
and you heard it. And she's off base, so she's not actually mandated to do it off base, but yeah, she did it. Nobody was
Yeah.
watching. I don't know that there was a single person outside, but she still felt compelled to do
Yeah.
it. And that was really cool to hear. The interesting thing with that, with the differences between bases, is the Marines do it at sun up, sundown. The Army does it 3 times, but it's different. So they do it in the morning,
Mhm.
then they do it at 5, and then they do it at 10, and it doesn't change. So like the Marines fluctuates throughout the year, and the Army is done at
With
the
the
same
sunset.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the
So was the
Army
Air
is done
Force.
on
The Air
time.
Force was at 5 or 6 every day. Amelia, you're still there.
Oh yeah. When do they do colors
5.
and stuff? 5.
According to my son, it's 5.
Do they do one at 10
He would
also?
know.
He would know. It's
Oh
5,
yeah, at 10
and
they
then
play something.
Reveille is 7:30.
In the
Yeah.
Yes. And then what about at night?
Taps.
He's asleep, but that's at 10.
10. That's
10.
at 10.
So 7:35 and
Sometimes
10.
11.
So same as
Yeah.
ours. Yeah. But that's one of those things that you have to get used to when you switch back and
Yeah.
forth between living on different bases, living on a Marine base, living on an Army base, and sometimes, yes, we are all we are all Marines, but there are times in which we are living on other bases or near them. So Amelia now, her husband is working with Marines, but because housing's so weird in Okinawa, they're living on an Air Force base. We are in a joint billet, so that means that my husband is working with civilians and all of the branches. And so we are on an army base, well, near an army base. And then Lacey over here, who has abandoned us. Just kidding. But
We are still, I mean, it takes me minutes to get to the gym on base. So we're right out the back gate, and it's awesome. Like hearing the boom booms all
Yeah.
the time. I actually really enjoy that, the sound of freedom. So there's that. And then we can hear colors at night. And it's just a really safe area. I really like it. I love being around a base. Any even civilian who lives around a base loves it. I mean, yes, they can get rowdy. They're Marines. Eleanor Roosevelt really said it the best.
she did.
They can get rowdy and wild, but it's like the safest place I've ever been. And honestly, I remember when we were in Okinawa the first time. My kids were little. I only had the 2 little girls with me. The other 2 were in school. We were getting groceries. We were coming out of the commissary on Camp Courtney grocery store. One of my like boxes on the bottom, maybe it was sparkling water or something, it like fell out. And a Marine like hustled over and picked it up and was like, "Oh, here, ma'am, let me help you with that." And like, I bristle at this. I'm like, I've got it. Clearly, I could probably lift more than you, bro. But I just thought that was really cool. You don't see that. And
Yeah.
he was like 20 something Marine. Like he was super young, so I couldn't outlift that guy. But I was still like, you don't see this. I never experienced that on the Air Force base.
Yeah.
Or the Army base or the Navy base or anything. Not to say that there aren't, airmen, soldiers, Navy seamen that wouldn't do that. I just never encountered it.
Right. Well, and you encounter even less out in town, unless you're just happen to be in a really great place. You're not going to see it there either.
I don't know. I think that's like those elements are some of the differences that we have as far as our lifestyle. I mean, we talk about the vocabulary in every episode where we have something and we try to, tell people ahead of time, like, here's the acronym you're going to hear today. But even just in our daily lives and the jokes between branches,
Yes.
and our kids, and the jokes between branches that our kids witness, it's pretty cool. We're really fortunate to be able to experience this, but
It is.
it doesn't come without cost.
This is true. And that cost is often just trickles down to our kids in a way that, man, they are so strong. Like the stuff that we don't necessarily think they realize until they know how to voice it. And then they voice it and you're like, yeah, I didn't really mean for you to add that level of worry to your shoulders.
Yeah, it gets heavy.
It does. Yeah, the last surprise deployment for us and
Yeah.
just recently. That one, I mean, we had a 6-day warning, and that one was tough in a lot of ways, but that one sat very heavy compared to any of the other times that he was gone. And I don't know exactly why it was. Yes, it wasn't necessarily the safest location for him to go, but I don't know if it was the lack of foreknowledge or if it was the timing, the fact that it had run over by Christmas.
Deployments are one of the hardest things that the kids have to deal with. Charlotte actually handled the 9-month deployment like a champ. She didn't shed a tear the entire time he was gone, but the moment she hit his arms on that homecoming, she broke down and was like absolute hysterics. And that along with the goodbyes is what breaks you as a mom.
Yeah, that is, the goodbyes are so rough. Zoe had a really tough time a year or so into it in Okinawa because a lot of her friends were leaving, and that was a really hard time for her. But has Josh, I mean, I don't know about with Clara. Like, obviously there's Clara and Lexi, and that was like, I don't know what it was like at your house after we left, but the short drive to the hotel and when Wyatt went to get gas in your van, it was not pretty in our hotel room that night. But like, how have your kids handled all of the fluctuating?
So with friends leaving, I think at first they're so young that time is just kind of like, I mean, your kids are little and time passes so differently when they're little. You notice it when they're babies, and the fact that, like, well, I did, like, Sam deployed when Clara was a few months old, and then came back when she was over a year, and he like reached down into her stroller to get her, and she like slapped his hands away.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
Who are you?
That's such a Clara thing to do.
It's so Clara.
Don't touch me. And she would take, if he served her breakfast, like he tried to, give her breakfast the next day, and she took the bowl like off her little high chair while looking at him and like dumped it out. Like, I'm not accepting.
You're a stranger.
Strange man. Especially because where Sam deployed that time was like almost no connectivity. So there was no like FaceTime or Skype or any of that. The kids did not see or hear from him for 9 months.
Right.
And I talked to him, but I also noticed that, especially for Josh, talking on the phone with Sam was harder than Sam just being gone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's also like an interesting thing civilians don't understand. They're like, oh, you're like withholding their child. Like, no, because if I let him talk to his dad, he's 3.5, 4, and he truly does not understand that, like, daddy, please come home is not going to work. And it's easier for daddy to just be gone.
Yeah.
And then daddy come back instead of all this like back and forth.
Yeah.
And like deployment wise, it's easier when they just go. And just time passes differently when they're little. But as we've been out here and seen more and more people go and the kids get older and older, obviously, it gets harder and harder. Especially, Josh is 9, so he fully realizes that like his friends are now across an ocean and we're not just going to go see them. Like it's a huge major ordeal to go see friends, and they're not just across the ocean and everybody's congregated in this lovely one base. they're far flung, and we live on an Air Force base. And so like one of his best little friends that was right across the street will never be stationed with them again because they're Army.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I'd like to go visit them, but like they'll never be stationed with us again. And several people that have moved, they're Air Force, they're whatever. And the likelihood of us actually being in the same location is almost
Minimal.
none.
Yeah.
Like you can maybe with Marines, we'll be close, but the Air Force has 56,000 places to go to, and Marines have like 5. Should the Marine Corps see fit, we'll probably wind up close to each other at some point in time. But yeah, I think Josh really gets it now that like this is goodbye. And if you see this person again, it is going to be years before you see them again. And I think Clara kind of gets it now too. Like she's like, I'm this. So Lexi moving away. Sorry, the only person that really impacted her was Lexi out of the whole Wilson family.
That's the same. That's fine.
Lexi moving away was the first time she cried about someone moving away, because other times she's like, okay, bye, like see you later. And later could be in 2 years, and she'd be like, wow, this was no time at all.
Right.
But yeah, that was the first time she actually cried about someone moving away and really realized, like, I'm not going to see this person. I'm not going to see them tomorrow, and I'm not going to see them the next day, but the day after that day, as she says, or the day after that day. That one hit her pretty hard.
Yeah.
And our friends that had a baby, they moved, and Clara sat like holding the baby, just like crying, because she was like, well, the next time I see the baby, she's gonna be big and she won't be a baby anymore. And that's hard. That like she really gets it now. Clara asked me to please stop talking about it because it makes me sad.
Yeah. Well, Lexi would be doing that too. I mean, the discussions of this makes her upset. She's also very good at making herself cry, but this is a legitimate, like we talked about, opening that present at Christmas and being confronted with like the best friend that she can't actually like hold is tough in all the ways. And she, like Clara, they're finally at that age where it makes sense. Of course, I'd like to think it's a little bit easier that they can FaceTime some, but now that we're not homeschooling, she doesn't have quite as much flexibility for the late night rambles that she was doing when we were in New Jersey. But hopefully soon. I did tell her about the message that you sent me earlier, and she was like, wait, does that mean that I get to? Because at first she thought that only I was going to get to see you. I was like, no, that wasn't the point. She was like, oh, all the light.
Yeah. I think, and I mean to like tie it all into being here and being in Japan, like the deployment, every service also defines a deployment as something different. Like you'll talk to an Air Force family and they'll say that their active duty service members been deployed like 50 times. And from a Marine perspective, we're like, that's not even possible. Like right. You can't deploy 50 times, because in a Marine deployment, and someone can correct me, I think it's 6 months.
6 to 9 months.
6 to 9 months is a deployment, and anything under 6 months is TDY. And that's like classified as something different, and you get different money, and everything about it is different. So, Sam went TDY. The whole world shut down during COVID, but somehow he managed to be gone all the time.
He did.
And he went TDY for up to like 3 or 4 months. And it's like, oh, well, that's a deployment, but it's not.
Yeah.
And I actually am of the belief that TDYs are harder than deployments because they come and go. They're here for 2 weeks, and then they're gone for 4 weeks, and then they're here for 5 days, and then they're gone for a week. And I think that is much harder. And you go TDY much more here in Japan because things they have to do are in America. And because of the nature of some of their jobs, it has to be in person. Yeah. So they go to Hawaii or they go to Quantico, and they go for like a week.
Yes.
And then they come back and their whole schedule's messed up.
Or months for classes.
Yeah, or months for classes. And then they come back and they go to the field, and then they go to Guam, and then they go like for an exercise, and it's here. And everyone says this. This isn't like a thing I've come up with in my own brain. the forces in the Pacific are some of the most active, like in the fact that they were always gone and, now this is the tip of the spear and they're
Hmm.
always doing something. And the tempo here is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the trade-off for that, to go back to what we're trying to talk about in this episode is that we get to live in Japan, which
Yes.
is
Yeah.
like, I can't say I would be like pushing Sam out the door in order to live in Japan. I wouldn't be like, please leave so we can live in Japan. We miss him, but it is pluses and minuses, right? Yes, he's gone a lot,
Yeah.
but we live in
But
Japan.
there's a view when you
So
go in the Legion Gate, that view, like going down the hill
Yes.
towards the gym and being able to look
yeah.
from the top of that hill over the East China Sea and sometimes seeing the rigs out there and like that stuff. And I mean, we went through that gate, how many times a week, if not a day, for dance classes and everything else. And that view got me every time. And more times
Yeah.
than not, I would say, and even Wyatt and I, years in, we were like, we live in Japan. Like it was
Yeah.
just this thing. And the views that we live in were just amazing. And the kids still love it. They still want to go back there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I don't think, the exception to the deployment rule is the 31st Mu. And that's because they go out at 3 months. So they're a
Yeah.
little bit shorter and they are considered a deployment, but it has to still be that like time frame. And so we had a few of those while we were there because that's why we went out. But I agree. The short stints are much harder on everybody. Wyatt, we had to be on the island for 20 months before Wyatt hit 1 year of solid time on island.
Yeah.
And because and that included during COVID. He had two floats and he went back to the States 3 times and for various things. And yeah, similar situation. And that was hard for the kids. He missed a birthday and he missed a few different situations. And birthdays are tough. Birthdays and holidays are some of the roughest things that the kids have to go through. But like you said, getting to do all of that in Japan kind of eases that some. And then Japan comes back with them, and we have certain things that customs and culture that sticks with the kids. Obviously, Amelia, you guys are still there, so this stuff is still pretty fresh for your kids. They have to do it every day. But Lexi comes in, and the very first thing she does is those shoes come off, like at almost every single person's house. And I'm like, we should probably at least introduce ourselves before you start taking your shoes off in this house because they may not want that. But that's just a normal thing to do, and that happens with Lacey's kids too. And almost any time that she wants my attention, my first reply is height. Like from anywhere in the house, I reply with height. We started trying to use Tadashi for the correct, like instead of answering with height. What are some of the like cultural aspects that seem to stick with Josh and Clara outside of what they're learning in culture classes, like that they just seem to do?
So shoes off, definitely. Like they take their shoes off. We've kind of always been a shoes off household because it always grossed me out.
Right.
But shoes off has stuck, and on the rare occasion that we do go back to America, the kids like come in and they take their shoes off, and people are like, oh, you can leave your shoes on, and both the kids are like, ew.
Why?
Yeah.
Like, do you know how dirty that is?
Yeah.
And then also I think, and not that my children are perfect at this, but actually, you know what? I'm going to brag on them. They're really, really, really good at this particular aspect of like Japanese culture. When you go to theme parks and things like that in Japan and on trains, people wait in line very, very orderly and nicely and quietly. And we were in Kyoto with the kids, and Kyoto is like what everyone in America thinks Japan should look like,
Right.
because it's all the old buildings and everything. And so we're in the train station getting ready to go to Arashima, which is where the bamboo forest is, and there's all these temples, and it's like a giant tourist thing.
Yeah.
And my kids have traveled extensively around Japan, and we're on the train, and my kids are sitting there just, quietly, not eating their snack and drinking their drink, because you don't do that on the trains here.
No.
And there's these Americans. They could have been Canadians, but they're probably Americans, and they were very loud, and they're like drinking coffee and all this stuff. And both of my kids were like, kind of just like staring at them, like this is not,
This is not
Claire was like,
appropriate. What are you doing?
they're I know, Clara, you're not supposed to be eating. And she's like, I know. And they kind of like side eye other Americans who are misbehaving now. And I mean, not necessarily misbehaving, just like not adapting to the culture, talking on trains and being loud and not waiting in line nicely, which is what my kids do. They do all those things now because you just wait in line. Like
Yeah.
at Disney, you just wait there.
Yeah.
All of it. Well, and when we went to Tokyo, again, I'll go back to your birthday like I did in the last episode, but when we went, and the reason I bring this up is a picture popped up the other day. I don't remember if I showed you or sent it to you, but it was Zoe. It's Zoe, Clara, and Lexi on a train in Tokyo. And Zoe's sitting there and she's got her arms out, and Lexi and Clara are both laying on her, and they all have their little masks on, and they're just sitting there like, they're basically asleep because who knows what we just run them ragged that day. But they just huddled and they were silent. But anytime we got on the train and Clara and Lexi, like, because we had decent, like 30-minute, metro
Yeah.
rides. And anytime we got on there and Clara and Lexi would play, they would play, but they played like this was like you couldn't hear them at all. Like they were like super quiet and like didn't argue. And we've talked about how they can be like
Oh, yeah.
cats, but oh no, they were super respectful and quiet. They would turn around and that was like
Yeah.
they tried to stay in their space and they didn't necessarily sit still, but they did a pretty good job at fitting in too. But it does take some practice and it's awkward for us like adults to go into that, but the kids adapt pretty quick.
Well, it's strange to
Yeah.
like, especially if you get on a train with like a friend or something like that, or the rare occasion I get to travel with Sam. You get on a train and then you're just like,
Hmm.
you can be having a conversation, and then those train doors close.
And it's weird because it's not always considered totally inappropriate to talk.
Yeah.
But
I think it's like if no one is talking,
yes,
like you don't want to be that person that's talking, but if there's like a little bit quiet chatter, then
right.
you
You can do
you
it.
can
Yeah.
have
Like
a
the
little low
commuter,
conversation.
the longer
Yeah.
trains, but a lot of the like city trains, everybody's by themselves. So they're
Yeah.
not talking to each other anyway. And so if you just
No.
happen to be with a group, it is really awkward because you're the only one traveling with another person. Everybody else is by
Yeah.
themselves. So they have their phones or they're like
Yeah.
studiously ignoring everyone.
Yes. Well, and I think also like how comfortable my kids are with public transport. Also,
Mhm.
like they have, and I know in other places in America this is like a thing, but everywhere we've lived it's not. They have their little lanyard and it has their train card, and they just scan their little train cards and go through, and okay, what train are we getting on and how many stops, and how like it's just so normal for them. And then also like culturally, Japan, and I've read a little bit that like foreigners think this, and Japan isn't like the safe haven that we make it out to be, but that is our reality. Like my reality is that Japan is a really, really safe place for like me and my children compared to America.
Mhm.
And my kids go into Family Mart and Lawson's by themselves.
Yeah.
And I think it was my mom. We were going somewhere, my mom and dad, and I, gave the kids 500 yen and was like, okay, go in and get a onigiri. And my mom was like, are you not going with them? No.
No. They'll be fine.
And I would not dream of sending my 9 and at the time 6-year-old into a store by themselves in America.
Oh,
like,
no.
And especially where I couldn't see them.
Yeah.
Or like bathrooms by themselves.
Oh yeah, and I've watched Lexi even. I remember this. It was at the end. I didn't do it when she was younger because 3, she just didn't have a clue where she was
Right.
going. But
Yeah.
Zoe did, like from the food court at Rycom Mall to the bathrooms, which are all the way across. But you can, from a certain angle, you can see it, and then it's around a corner. But yeah, I let them go. Like, all right, it's right over there. You know where it is. Go, because I mean, and this works in our favor. Over there, our kids are the anomalies. Like, it is extremely noticeable when 4 little blonde, white-haired children come waltzing out there are no blonde children in this country. Like, our children are the anomaly. So if they get lost, somebody's probably going to be able to find us and like bring them back. It's going to be really noticeable if that's the case. But they're also easy to track in a crowd.
Yeah. Well, and you see, it's if you remember, when we get to Japan, we have to go and do a newcomer's brief, and they talk to us about culture and things like that. And one of the first things that our briefer had said to us is like, you will see children that you in your American culture think are too young or too small or too whatever to be alone. And they'll be on a train or on a bus or walking. And you need to understand these kids probably don't speak English.
Right.
And you need to not stop them because you will confuse them more. And like you will confuse them and you'll probably scare them. And like they might miss a train or a bus or something. And you need to just let them go because they know where they're going and what they're doing. And you hear this and you're like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then you see a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know if they're really 5, 6. I'm not sure. 6 or 7.
I mean, they're tiny though, because even if they
They're
are 6, they're the
tiny.
size of little tiny 5-year-olds. Like they're
And
just
you watch
little.
them get on a train in Tokyo with like, if they're in their little school uniform, they've got some of their school friends,
Yeah.
And ride for 30 minutes on this train. And then they get off and there's not a single adult in charge of them to
Nope.
be found.
Nope.
And she was so right. It is very like, this small child is alone. Very, very alone.
Very alone.
And you see them walking home from school, and again, they look much too young to be doing that. But then also you have to think about that show that's like about they give Japanese kids tasks
Yes.
to do like independently and like how can they do it?
Yes.
And it really is just like I think the kids are a little more, and I can confirm, my Japanese friends or any Japanese listeners confirm or deny this. I think they just are a little bit more independent because they can read.
Well, and I would even argue to say that probably when we grew up, we had a lot of that independence. I mean, even you
Yeah.
did. You
Yeah.
were away from your family at a much earlier age than any of the rest of us were. But growing up where I grew up, I didn't have access to those. I lived out in the country. So even though I was independent and I would go out and do things because my parents were at work, I wasn't in a city or I wasn't getting myself around. I was doing it all from there, not trying to get through even a smaller city in America from the mall back home. Mine was waiting for somebody to drop me off somewhere. And then I could be independent after getting that point. Whereas these kids are, okay, you walk out your front door and you're on your own until you walk back through your front door. And it's amazing. But our kids picked up some of that independence along the way.
That's one of the beautiful things about living in Okinawa. Like it was 1950s America very much. When we moved on to base our first tour, it was like, all right, when the lights come on, come home.
Yeah. Well,
and we didn't see Emma all day on Saturdays.
I mean, you're not that far off in housing. A lot of the housing was built in the 60s, some of it in the 40s. So, I mean, it really is just kind of that way.
We live on base, and it really does feel like it did growing up, or like what you see, like 1950s, like 3 o'clock, the kids are kind of home from school, and my kids are always home from school, but open the front door, and like I'll go to neighbors' houses and be like, have you seen the boys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or now sometimes when we were on McT, it was, we had the neighborhood, because the circle around the little neighborhood that I lived on is exactly 1 mile around. And so it was that with a little bit like side streets. So you had a neighborhood like page, and if anybody really couldn't find someone, then you got on there and you were like, I am looking for this child. Whose house is my child at? Please send them home. And home they come. I mean, they were locked on base. It's not like they were going anywhere.
My kids, leaving there twice, have brought fashion trends and all kinds of crazy things back, and habits and words. The one I have the hardest time with is the leggings with the shorts. But that was a decision that she made at 9 years old, and it was fine. But for the other kids, we asked all of them questions. We wanted to ask them questions specifically related to moving. And while a few of them are too young, particularly the one hanging on me. So sorry if the breathing is loud.
Oh, no, can't hear it.
She is way too young to answer any questions regarding moving because she was born in Japan just a year before we came back. But we did ask our other children some questions, and here's what they had to say.
Hi, Clara. Okay, so April is the month of the military child, and we are interviewing kids that are military kids, and you are a military kid. And we're going to talk about moving, okay? Where was the last time we PCS'd? What did we do? Where did we go?
Okinawa, Japan.
Okinawa, Japan. And how old were you when we moved?
2.
2. So you don't really remember a whole lot, do you?
No.
No.
I only remember like 2 things.
Maybe 2 things? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you some questions, okay? What was the most exciting part about moving overseas?
Eating sushi.
Eating sushi. Okay, what was unexpected about moving for you?
We were traveling around the world, and it would take 4 hours on the plane, but I didn't really...
14 hours.
14 hours.
You didn't really realize how long we would be on the airplane,
Yeah,
huh?
'cause I fell asleep.
Yeah. What helped you get through our move?
Mommy and Daddy and Joshie, because Joshua pushed me in a stroller because I was sleeping and I was 2. And Mommy and Daddy were rolling all the suitcases 2 and 2.
Yep. What is a good life lesson from moving to a new country?
We get to learn new stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and we get to learn about like stuff that we don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff that we know but we forgot.
Oh, okay. Hi, Josh.
Hi.
We're going to be talking about moving. And you did a pretty big move, right?
Yes.
How long was it to get to our new duty station?
14 hours.
14 hours. That was just to get to one place. Then we had another flight, right?
Yes.
So it was like a whole day?
Yes.
Yep. And where did we move to?
Okinawa, Japan.
Where did we move from?
Camp Lejeune, North Carolina.
Yep. And how old were you when we moved?
5.
You were 5. Do you remember it?
Barely.
Barely? Okay. What was the most exciting part about moving overseas?
The night when you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm here. And then all friends took us out to eat ramen and go to the beach, and how close the beach was to us.
Yeah, that was the
Yeah.
most exciting part
Yeah,
for
that
you?
was- yeah.
What was the hardest part about moving overseas?
Leaving all my friends.
Leaving all your friends? Yeah? Did you like leaving Glemma and Morfar at the airport?
No.
No, you didn't really like that, huh? I think you don't really remember, but that was pretty hard for you, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah? Do you remember or not really?
Not really.
I remember that it was hard for you. What was unexpected about moving overseas for you?
That we were going to go to a foreign country.
Yeah, and did you really understand what that meant?
No.
No,
we
not
were
really.
going to the same place.
Yeah, you kind of thought we were just
Yeah.
going to the same place, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is something you learned after moving?
That going to the foreign country and doing new thing and trying new things is okay.
Is it good?
Yes, it's good to experience the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the biggest lesson you learned?
That you don't have to be scared when you move to a whole new different place.
That you just don't have to be scared? Yeah, that's a
you
good
don't have to
lesson.
be friends.
Because moving is kind of scary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lexi, do you remember anything that was unexpected when we moved back? Things that may have surprised you or you may have thought were weird when we moved back to the United States?
Yeah, it was feeling a little weird, but I liked it.
Do you know what felt weird?
It felt weird being in a new country.
Was there anything in particular that was weird about it that you can think of?
It was weird being in a country that had 50 states.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that might do it. What helped you through the moves? Is there anything that
what
helped you?
helped me was, when when my mom and dad were cuddling me.
Yeah, we like doing that. Zoe, what is the most exciting part about moving overseas?
For me, the most exciting part for moving overseas was me being able to move with my friends, my best long life friend. And the day we found out, I wasn't actually too excited to move overseas. I was back and forth, and I mainly was just excited for the free, unique food and the presents and the time I spent with my friends.
Presents.
I was 8.
Oh, you mean like the presents that we gave you to tell you?
Yeah.
I see. Okay. What was the hardest part, moving back to the States or going to Okinawa?
The hardest part was definitely coming back from Okinawa to the United States, because when I moved to Okinawa, that was a period of when my brain started to develop more and would actually start remembering memories. And so when I came back, I felt like this part of me in the United States wasn't fully connected with me.
Okay.
Just because I connected with Okinawa and Japan and their really good food and their sushi and ramen and a lot, and just
Okay. What was unexpected, good or bad, about moving to Japan?
other kids sort of understanding each other,
What other kids?
other military kids. I lived on a military base, and so I was around other kids whose parents were in the military of some way, and so we all sort of understood each other and what kind of stress levels we could go through when our parents were either deployed or we just felt overwhelmed with things.
What was unexpected about moving back?
Moving to New Jersey, New York.
Is it the place that was unexpected?
It was the place and how quickly we moved. I wasn't expecting us to it kind of just went by quickly in like a flash of light. Our house was packed up into nothing in 6 hours while I was at school, so
Yeah.
it was from the safest place in the world to kind of not really a safe place in the United States.
What helped you through the moves, there or back?
Talking to my best friend, I feel like we were definitely emotional support buddies for each other's therapists. Basically have a talk sesh sort of every weekend. We just basically tell each other what's happening.
What is the most exciting part about moving overseas?
Going home and eating the food again and visiting the beaches.
Okay, so you kind of knew what to expect when we went back to Okinawa. You had some memories from the first time we lived there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were excited to live there again.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was unexpected, good or bad, about either of the moves?
I was expecting when we moved back here to live in Temecula again,
Mm-hmm.
and I was kind of nervous because I didn't really want to go to the same church because no one had seen me in a while, and I don't know, I was just kind of nervous to move back here.
But what was unexpected about leaving Japan?
I guess leaving Japan, I was expecting to stay another year,
Yeah.
and I was really excited because I could have gotten the role of Clara, and I was really excited for that, really. So I was kind of upset about that, but it's okay because we moved at the perfect timing.
Mm-hmm.
It was getting crazy in the dance world, so.
What helped you through the moves?
knowing that it wasn't goodbye, and I'd probably visit again soon.
Visit where?
Okinawa.
You want to visit Okinawa again?
Yeah.
So what have you learned, or what life lessons have you gained from moving like you have?
Ooh. I guess it's not goodbye forever. There's always next time, and you meet so many more friends along the way that you will remember your old friends, but you kind of forget them because you have all these new friends. And
So you've met a lot of people. So the greatest lesson would maybe put yourself out there?
yeah.
You're the one that struggles the most with that.
Yeah.
But you did a really great job putting down roots when we were in Japan.
That was because when I was public school, everyone else there was a military kid, and so we all knew where each other were coming from, if that makes sense. So we all knew what we had gone through.
The military kids, you guys have your own culture.
Yeah.
And so you guys can find faster ways to relate, probably.
Yeah.
What were you most excited about moving back overseas?
The food, all that was really great, but also just being able to kind of see relive my childhood and, get more like really cool stories just living overseas.
Yeah, because we were going back to Okinawa.
Yeah.
What is the hardest part about moving overseas?
Moving itself, saying bye to people, that's tough. It gets old.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we definitely put down roots in between our 2 times in Okinawa. How's the transition been coming back from overseas?
Really, maybe just better than even going to Okinawa, because I get to see, and hang out with all my friends again.
The friends you had before we moved?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to come back to the same area. So as far as moving as a teen, moving as a kid, what are the biggest lessons that you've learned from that? What are the greatest things that have come out of moving?
The ability to do it over and over again, so I won't be new to it when I'm moving out, so it'll be a lot easier.
That'll never happen.
So now that we've heard from our craft projects, now it's time to hear from our fellow crafters about their take on moving with kids in the military.
What advice do you have for service members preparing to move overseas with kids?
Advice for moving overseas with kids? Don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. The biggest thing is, you'll hear everybody say that you should involve the kids in every single aspect of it and do all these things to make sure that they're part of it. My biggest advice is just to make sure that everything is taken care of for them, so that they don't have to think about, the next school. They don't have to think about what their house is going to look like. They don't have to show them what it's going to be. But there's a lot of people that talk about involving them in the decisions, and I think that's just a lot for their little brains to think of and take up. So making sure that they can just show up and be kids. I think that was the biggest thing. Even for the older kids, when with the teenagers, they kind of wanted to know what they were coming into, but if you just lay it out and present it in an easy, consumable way, it makes the transition a whole lot easier.
So with everything that's difficult moving overseas, what would you say is probably the biggest difference between when they're younger and when they're older, since we've done this twice with vastly different age groups?
So when they're younger, there's more irrational breakdowns. You don't know why it's happening, and it makes it difficult because you're like, I don't know what's happening. Just get on the plane. Let's just go. But when they're older, I guess it's really just the teen angst.
Yeah.
It's rough because it's the teen angst. When they're in that mid point, like when we came back from Japan, that 9 to 12-year-old age frame or time frame is difficult because they're not children and they're not teens. So it's like squishy, so you get a little bit of both. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of the issues. There's differences in the issues you got to deal with.
So which is easier, moving with the older kids or the younger kids?
I think moving with they're all about the same. It's just differences.
Different degrees.
Yeah. I mean, the little ones are fun and the big ones are fun.
They are, just
So,
in different ways.
yeah.
So what is the impact on you when moving for work gives you no option and it means moving the kids?
It's painful because you can see the pain. You don't want to uproot them, especially toward the end. It's like knowing that you're taking away their stability, and it's like it's not your decision, but it's the life that it's the profession that you've chosen is affecting their stability.
You mean like the stability of the community and like the physical house, not the home.
Correct, but like there is a difference in kids, and our kids always find it when they go into new places and they're around kids that have been together their entire lives.
Yeah.
There's a difference in connection between those kids and military kids. Military kids, they're always having to fit in and always having to find new ways to fit in with those crowds, and it's tough on them and it hurts the parents a lot. That's one of the reasons why there's like military families probably are closer, is because that they are all they have. And even inside the cycle of PCSs, when you go to different places, their friends are going to leave in a year or two. And
because they're off cycles. Yeah.
Cycles.
Yeah. So what would you say is probably the best part about having kids with this career? I mean, aside from having a family and having children, like the opportunities they've been given, what do you feel is like the best aspect of it?
I mean, the financial stability, being like dad is always getting a paycheck, is good, because they never have that same need or want financially.
Such a dad answer.
Well, that's kind of a role.
Yeah.
So there's that, but then there's also, the ability for them to experience different cultures, different educational opportunities. Yeah, it's just the breadth and range of opportunities are something that military kids get that other kids don't really get.
That's the take on moving from some of our kids and one Marine making this life possible. Tune in to our next episode to listen to a few more stories from these amazing kids detailing their experiences as military children.
Thank you for listening today. Follow us on Instagram at Virtual Compound Podcast for more content and the latest updates.
We changed it. All you had to do is say, welcome back to the Virtual Compound. I'm Amelia. You're good.
I'm literally following instructions.
You are, but then you said you weren't going to be able to do it, so we changed it for you.
You said I was supposed to read the pink.
Somebody read that face.
You're so cute. Oh my God.
It was with the guys, like, interviewing our husbands, our fellow arts and crafters, as in our husbands. Because you're good at arts and crafts.
Biker. I get it.